Hello, everybody. You're reading with Jimmy, and we're analyzing Guy de Maupassant's The Horla. This is the first part of a four-part analysis, pages 313 to 319. The story begins, this is diary narration. May 8th, what a glorious day I spent. This is first-person narration. Some people call it diary narration. So we're actually reading what a person writes in his diary. This narrator is in the story, which means he or she is subject to being human. All the qualities that make a human being are going to be in this narrator. So it's very important to understand that this narrator is like us. So the first two paragraphs here, I made a note here. This is just beautiful writing. It's unbelievable writing. I know it's translated from the French, but if you read it, as you should have read it in the full, when we read the whole story, I don't want to read the whole thing again, but when the narrator writes, I love this part of the country and I love living here because it is here that I have my roots, those deep and delicate roots which bind a man to the soil where his forefathers were born and died. Bind him to ways of thinking and eating, to local customs, dishes, turns of phrases, to the intonations of the peasants' voices, to the smells of the villages, of the earth, of the air. It's just beautiful. We also get a sense that this narrator has been living in the same place for a while because these are his roots. The third paragraph is the same thing. He loves this house of mine where he grew up. So he's living where he grew up, the Seine River. I made a note here about that river. It's the third longest river in France. You can read that if you'd like to. And he starts just describe. This is a visual description of where he lives, right? Over to the left is Rouen, the vast city of blue roofs lying beneath a bristling host of Gothic belfries. They are beyond number, these belfries, slender, sturdy, etc. So he's really describing where he lives. How delightful everything was this morning. So May 8th in the morning, everything is delightful. I made a note here what a Gothic is. It's the style of architecture prevalent in Western Europe in the 12th and 16th century. So he's probably living in an old house. Most of European cities are older than American cities. And I want you to get a sense of where he's living and the things around him, because things around anybody affect us. 11 o'clock, a long line of boats passed by my gate. So he must be on the river someplace, drawn by a pint-sized tug, which panted with effort and vomited thick clouds of smoke. So tugboats pulling ships. Vomited is an interesting word. After a couple of English schooners, there are red flags, and he's going to describe more boats. Before we go on, as long as you have read the whole story with Jimmy, I want to quote Joseph Conrad, because you're going to have to understand what happens to this guy. A man is much more like the sea, whose movements are too complicated to explain and whose depths may bring up God only knows what at any moment. Joseph Conrad was a writer. You may recall the movie Lord Jim, some other movies, Heart of Darkness, which was that was the base of Apocalypse Now. Joseph Conrad was a Polish of descent, and he was the only guy to ever write in a language other than his own that I know of. And he became famous in English. He wrote in English, even though he was Polish. The Horla, roughly translated, means outsider. And not that it matters, but it does, that he wrote this in 1887. So you get a sense of the time period when this was published, and also the time period when this narrator theoretically is writing in his diary, in his journal. Okay? So he sees some of these boats passing by. There was a splendid Brazilian three-master, all white and gleaming. And for some reason, he salutes her, the ship. He salutes her. And he writes it in his diary. 4 days pass. I've had a touch of fever the last few days. I feel unwell, or rather, I feel sad. This is the beginning of the descent of this guy, of this narrator, into an area of being human that most people don't get to go to. Into madness, actually, if you read the story, like I hope you did. Because there's a big difference when you read it, when you read the diary and what he's writing about himself. Now, remember, he's writing about himself. Diaries are personal expressions to yourself, about your observations. So it's like we're peeking into his diary. And because he's the first person narrator, he's like us. He could be lying to us. He could be, but there's no indication yet that he is. But I want you to call your attention that there's a big difference between feeling unwell and sad. He's got fever. And then he asks an interesting question. Where do they come from, these mysterious influences which turn our happiness into gloom and our self-assurance into distress? Isn't that an interesting question? You often wonder, what changed your mood recently? He calls them mysterious influences. Something changed his mood. And he goes, it's as if the invisible air, were full of unfathomable powers, etc. And this is a very interesting reading. I go for a stroll by the river, and after walking, I suddenly turn back feeling miserable. He's not feeling well. Not feeling well. So who can tell where they come from? Everything about us, everything we see without looking at it, everything we brush past without knowing it, everything we touch without feeling it, everything we meet without noticing it, has swift, surprising, and inexplicable effects on us, on our senses, and through them, on our ideas and our hearts. That's an extremely important statement that he wrote in his diary. Because everything we think, everything we get comes through our senses. So in that one paragraph, he's talking about what we see, what we hear, what we touch, etc. Sometimes you don't even know you've seen something, and suddenly perhaps you dream and there it is, right? There's a certain school of thought that says you never forget anything. Your brain just doesn't, remember it at the moment. But anything you've seen, felt, touched, heard, is stored someplace in your brain. It's, whether you believe it or not. So how profound it is, the mystery of the invisible. We can't fathom it with our wretched senses. Our senses. With our eyes, we can perceive neither what is too small nor what is too big. Neither what is too close nor what is too distant. When you read this, you have to say to yourself, either it makes a lot of sense or it doesn't. Who would write like this, first of all? Well, a troubled person is writing like this, right? He's basically saying the truth. We don't perceive what you can't see an atom. I was listening to the Heisenberg Principle, podcast today, and you can't see things. There's things you can't see. Colorblind people, Jimmy's colorblind, he can't see red and green. You could tell him it's red or green, but he won't be able to see it. So the point is that our senses are in fact limited. And whatever's bothering this narrator is basically because he's not getting the information from his senses. He talks about smell and taste. The smell of, with our sense of smell, which is feeble, the dogs have great senses of smell, right? Much better than ours. So, if only we had other senses that could work other miracles on our behalf. How many more things could we discover around us? Makes sense. He's feeling a little under the weather. And May 16th confirms it. He says, I am ill. I have a fever, an atrocious fever, or a feverish weakness which afflicts my mind just as my body. All the time I have this terrible feeling of imminent danger. See, you feel, something's going to happen, germinating in my blood and my flesh. Powerful writing, some disease. He can feel a disease in him. So May 18th, he goes to the doctor because he couldn't sleep anymore, and he found that the pulse was rapid, the pupils dilated, and the nerves on edge. That sounds like high blood pressure, huh? But that I had no symptoms of any alarming nature. I have to take showers and drink bromide of potassium. There's nothing serious. He's just got a rapid pulse, dilated pupil. Okay, whatever. A week goes by, no changes. The condition is really very strange. As evening draws on, an incomprehensible uneasiness comes over me. But I cannot understand the words. I try to read, but he can't read. I pace up and down. Vague and irresistible fear of sleep and fear of my bed. At 2:00, I go to my room. I'm no sooner inside than I double lock the door and shoot the bolts. You know, it's shoot the bolt. He doesn't shoot the bolts. He closes the bolts, right? I am afraid. But of what? I was never afraid of anything before. He opens up his wardrobes. He's looking under the bed. He's listening. I would say he's starting to act a little weird, wouldn't you? Something's going on with this narrator, right? There's foreboding and anxiety going on. He's obviously, something's going on. So down here, I wrote a couple of notes, limitation of the senses. Remember that. That's very important. And then I wrote paranoia. Paranoia is the unjustified suspicion, mistrust of other people and their actions, the unwarranted or delusional belief that one is being persecuted, harassed, betrayed by others, occurring as part of a mental condition. So if you start checking under your bed for something, his actions now, which speak sometimes louder than words, always speak louder than words, it's telling you that something's wrong with this guy. Unless you do that too. And if you do that too, maybe you should get checked out. I'm kidding. But did you ever forget your keys? Or, you pull away, you close the door, you lock the door, but you say to yourself, well, did I really lock the door? And you go back. That's happened to everybody. I guarantee it. Where you believed you did something, you say, did I really do that? So he's acting paranoid. He's fearful. He's sick. He's got a rapid pulse. Let's continue. A slight indisposition, a disorder of the circulation maybe is doing all this. Maybe he's got a little, backup. The imperfect functioning of the human machine. We're going to talk at the end of this analysis, when we finish this story, about the human body and how complicated it is and how delicate it is. In the delicate, imperfect functioning of the human machine, I want you to remember that, can make a melancholic of the happiest men and a coward of the bravest. There's lots of theories floating around about why we feel, what we think, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some people believe that it's all chemicals, right? It's nothing to do but all chemicals, which is why there's way too many drugs being prescribed these days, if you know what I mean. But the body itself is very complicated, and what's happening to this guy is very interesting. Because remember, we read things in order to see how other people lead their lives and how to lead ours. But I'm not saying you should be looking under your bed when you read this, Horla. What Jimmy's saying is that we are getting a glimpse into the mind of a character that you normally don't get unless you're like this character. And if you read the story, if you read the entire story with Jimmy, you know already what's going to happen. And that's why you go back and analyze it, because you already know you're dealing with a guy that's a little off, maybe a lot off in your opinion. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop reading the story, because we're all off a little bit. I'm telling you right now, maybe not as bad as this guy, but this is very important. And then he goes to bed and he waits for sleep. And if I'm waiting for he's waiting for the executioner. What a horrible sentiment. When you go to sleep, do you go to sleep like you're waiting for the executioner? I don't know about you, but Jimmy loves to sleep. Why? Because Jimmy loves to dream. I wait for it in terror of its coming. Now, it is a pronoun. What does it mean? Is he waiting for sleep? In this case, it sounds like it is sleep. I want you to pay very careful attention to pronouns in this story when we analyze it, because pronouns are part of the key to this guy's descent into madness. He's waiting for it, and it's coming with my heart pounding and my legs trembling. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? My whole body shivers in the warmth of the bedclothes to the moment when I suddenly fall asleep like a man falling into a chasm full of stagnant water to drown. Oh my God. Anybody picking up this diary and reading it, and if he showed this to the doctor to read it, what do you do? Would the doctor provide, don't worry about it, just some sodium bromide or whatever the hell he could prescribe? So I no longer feel the approach of perfidious sleep, lurking near me, watching me, waiting me, seize me by the head, close my eyes and annihilate me. So sleep, he's talking about sleep like it's a thing, like it's an it. I sleep for a long time, 2-3 hours, dream, no nightmare. A nightmare takes hold of him. He's fully aware he's in bed. I feel it. I know it. And I also feel somebody approach me. Jimmy should have highlighted that. Somebody. Look at me, touch me, climb into my bed, kneel on my chest, take my neck between his hands and squeeze all the strength trying to strangle me. Jesus. For my part, I struggle madly, hampered by the terrible helplessness that paralyzes us in dreams. Have you felt that? I felt that. I tried to cry out. I can't. I move. I can't. Grasping for breath and making frantic efforts, I try to turn over to throw off this creature who is crushing me and choking me, and I can't. Now we have a creature. So the pronoun it could have been sleep, but suddenly now there's this creature. The word creature is introduced into his diary. Suddenly he's panic-stricken, bathed in sweat. I light the candle, but he's alone. This nightmare, repeated every night, falls asleep. June 2nd, my condition has grown worse. What can be the matter with me? The bromide is useless. The showers are useless. So to tire out his body just now, he went for a walk in the forest and made a note of the forest near his house. At first, he thought the fresh air was good. He sets off down the broad avenue. A shiver suddenly runs through him, shiver of fear. He quickens up his pace. He thinks he's being followed. He swings around. He's all alone. I could see nothing behind me except the straight walls. Empty. I shut my eyes. I don't know why. I started spinning around on one heel very fast like a top and almost fell. I opened my eyes. The trees were dancing. The earth was swaying. And I was forced to sit down, but now I didn't know which way I had come. Think about that. So this guy is walking through the forest. He feels paranoid. He swings around. He makes himself dizzy, and he gets lost in the forest. Normal behavior? I don't think so. I don't think so. But the fact that he's documenting this in his diary and giving all of us a chance to experience what he's experiencing is a gift. It's an amazing piece of writing. It's just amazing. Last night was terrible. I had to go away for a few weeks. I'm going away for a few weeks. A month later, home again, I'm completely cured. So he breaks. He goes away. He's got to get out of there, out of his house. And he goes away and he says, I'm completely cured. What do you think is going on with this person? You can email me of your answers, but what do you think is going on? Something is going on with this guy, right? Something is happening to him that doesn't happen to normal people, which is why this is a very interesting story. So let's continue. The best way to get from Rouen to St. Abbey was a bus to take the 4, blah, 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 blah. Don't know how the narrator traveled. We don't know how he traveled to Mount St. Michael. This is where he went on his little trip, right? Okay. So he takes a trip from the 4th and he goes away for a while and he goes to Mount St. Michael. He has a splendid night. As I did at the dust, the town stands on a hill. There's his descriptions again. I uttered a cry of astonishment. The immense bay, beautiful. Dawn, I went out to sea. The tide was out. I saw the astonishing abbey. You all know what an abbey is, right? It's where monks live. Little city dominated by a great church. Gothic. There's the word Gothic again. Dwelling made for God on earth. Chimras. Right? What are chimras? They're fire-breathing female monsters with lion's heads on a goat's body and a serpent's tail. If you've ever seen a Gothic cathedral, you can see all sorts of gargoyles, these chimras, devils, fantastic beasts. And don't forget, Rouen, where he lives, is full of Gothic architecture. So he's in a different part now. He's gone to this place. And there's also Gothic architecture. And when he gets to the top, I said to the monk who was accompanying him, Father, what a wonderful place. And the priest goes, the winds are very strong. And we started chatting together. So he talks to the monk. The monk told me a great many stories of legends, and still more legends. One impressed him. And this is the legend that impressed him. The local inhabitants, people who live on the mount, claim to hear voices at night in the sands, followed by the sound of 2 goats, one bleating loudly, the other softly. Skeptics insist that they hear in the screeching, that's the screeching of the gulls, which sometimes sound like bleating. If you've ever heard gulls, certainly does. And sometimes like the wail of human voices. But the fishermen, returning late at night, swear that between one tide and the next, near the little town cut off from the world, they've met an old shepherd wandering the dunes. No one's ever seen his head, which is hidden by a cloak, but he leaves behind him a goat with the face of a man and the she-goat with the face of a woman, both of them with long white hair, constantly talking, quarreling in an unknown tongue, and then breaking off to bleat, at the tops of their voices, cry out like goats cry out. So that's the one that impressed him. I asked the monk, do you believe that? And the monk says, I don't know. If, he continues, there exist on earth creatures other than ourselves, how could we have failed to know of their existence? You see, how can we do that? Why haven't we seen them? Why haven't I seen them myself? So the monk says, do we see, this is very important if you read the story, this paragraph comes up later, exactly as he writes it in this part of his journal. And the monk says, do we see 100,000 parts of all that exists? Take the wind, the greatest force in nature, which knocks down men, blows down buildings, uproots trees, etc., blah, blah, blah. Have you seen it? Can you see it? And yet it exists. The wind. So we're going to stop here with this first part of the analysis. But before we start, I want to talk to you about some concepts I want you to think about. There are some excellent concepts in this story so far. One of the concepts you're going to have to deal with is what is reality. There's an old Star Trek episode, the original Star Trek, where they go to the OK Corral and they're fighting, and Spock has to convince the people that the bullets are not real. That's the only way when they do the shootout at the OK Corral that they're not going to get killed. So Spock does the mind meld and convinces Kirk and the crew that the bullets aren't real. So when the Earps come to start shooting them, because if you remember, they were the Clantons, none of the bullets affect them. The reality, what is reality? What is reality? Is reality what you dream? Another great movie, which was a war movie, has two sergeants in the movie. Defoe plays one of the sergeants, and Berenger plays the bad sergeant. The name escapes me now, but this is about the Vietnam War. They're in a bunker. They're smoking pot, and Berenger, the bad sergeant, comes down. He's a drunkard. He drinks. That's his pot. He comes down there, and they're smoking, and they stop there right away because the sergeant's there. And he looks at them all, and he takes a swig out of his bottle, and he says, "Why do you smoke that crap?" He used a different word. To escape reality? And he takes another swig of his bottle, and he looks at them around the room, and he says, "I'm reality." It's a powerful movie, and Jimmy will remember it by the next analysis. But when he said that, it was the truth. He has their life in their hands. He's the one who sends them into the bush, to fight the Viet Cong. So what is reality? Is reality, what is it when you dream? Dreams sometimes seem so real, don't they? They seem so real, and you wake up and you go, "Oh, it's just a dream." Kids love to be scared with dreams. They wake up, "Oh, it's just a dream." So reality can only be how you get you're alive. I'm alive. What do you mean, Jimmy? I'm alive. Cogito ergo sum, Descartes, right? I think, therefore I exist. Must be, right? That's reality. Is it? What is reality? I'll show you reality. I'll punch in. Okay. You get information from your senses, and there's a mind-body connection. The mind is the most amazing system in the world, amazing organ. But it's connected to your body, to your feelings, because it's producing your feelings in your mind. It's synapsing. We're going to talk about that. So this guy who's obviously descending into madness and losing control, he's got a mind-body whatever. That's synapsing on steroids or whatever. That's figurative language. So we're going to see more of what happens to our narrator in the next analysis. Let's stop here. Okay, you've been reading with Jimmy. This is part 1 of the analysis of the Horla. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you'll come back for parts 2, 3, and 4. If you want to email me any questions, comments, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Thank you very much. Hang in there.